We're again in the Gospel of John. We're in chapter 4. And last week, if you remember, we kind of knew the history of the people. We kind of set a context for all of that. In the simplest sense, Solomon, after Solomon, his divided heart leaves a divided legacy. There's a civil war. The 10 tribes of the north then, of course, will need a new capital because their area supersedes, if you will, the area of Jerusalem. And by the way, when those 10 tribes are taken captive, that's, if you've ever heard the term, the 10 lost tribes, that's where it comes from. It's from those 10 northern tribes. That's the idea of it. They're not lost. God knows where they are. And it's clear because in the book of Revelation, they will appear, at least all of them but one. I'll season your mind with that. But with that, they need a new capital. The 6th king, if you remember, king has a son, murdered by this guy who has a son, who's murdered by this guy who commits suicide. And then, of course, then there's the next guy. That guy's king number 6 within 50 years. He buys a piece of property from a guy named Shemer. Then he calls it in a simple sense Shemerville, or we would say Shemer Shechem. So with that, and then he calls it Shemeria, or Samaria. That's where we get the term. So Samaria is a region, but it's also a place. It's the capital of it. The same way that you might say that New York's a state, but then there's also New York City. So where do you live? New York, New York. Is kind of the idea. Now, so we got that. If you remember, it was... There's that. Bob's your uncle. It was basically within 200 years of that point, 722 BC, that the whole northern area is taken captive by the empire of Assyria, which today, for what it's worth, is basically Iraq. They go and they deport most of them and import a whole bunch of new people in. They're getting eaten by bears, and they go, well, the problem is we don't know the rituals of the god of the area, and he seems to have a problem with us. So if we could just do the things that we need to keep him away, we do it. So they bring in a couple of priests, if you will, at least one, teaches them the rituals, and things seem to be resolved. So what you have now are a bunch of people who aren't pure blood Jewish. So you have that issue to deal with, but you also have now a bunch of people, in essence, who are going through the motions. So that's kind of where that was our reference for the situation where Jesus having to go through Samaria. Samaria was considered no man's land. There was a great deal of animosity between the groups of people. And certainly with that, the Jews we saw last time would go around there, Samaria of Galilee here, Samaria in the middle, and then you have the area of Judea in the south. And so they would just go around and cross the Jordan, go on the east side of it, the area of the Gentiles. That'd be the Decapolis, 10 cities, and they go back around to Galilee. Now, today, for what it's worth, Samaria is also a dangerous area. A lot of anti-Western sentiment is bred in the areas of Samaria. As a matter of fact, there are areas we could go and visit, but you do need a bulletproof bus. Truly. Which, by the way, if you know anything about me, that doesn't thwart me at all. Now, because we know the history of the people, that helps us understand the animosity between a Samaritan woman in general and the idea of a Jew, because the Jew was, in essence, the big man on campus. He was the purebred. He was the quarterback, if you will. In America, I can say things like this in any sense. He was the quarterback, and they were sort of the kid who really never fit in, was the idea. They weren't liked, they weren't welcome. Now, with that in mind, I want to give you a little bit of history in regards to the place. We have a history of the people, but I want to give you a history of the place a little bit to deepen so that when we get into the text, which we're about to, it should help. And again, we can just read it and kind of go, this is really cool, but the more you realize the depth of the history in this, it's sort of like you dig an inch into the soil and you just find that this has got 1,000 stories to tell. Now, Israel, most of you are familiar with, Abraham did walk that land. As a matter of fact, he would get the covenant renewed, or the covenant ratified, if you will, in Genesis chapter 12 at the terebinth trees of Mamre. More, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But basically, Israel, as you may be aware of, goes into Egypt because of a famine. That's after Jacob's 12 sons. One of them is sold there. Joseph, he basically says, hey, things are good here, you should come so you don't starve to death. And they come there. And it had been a promise God had actually given to Abraham back in Genesis 15. He said, you'll be slaves in a nation that's not your own for 400 years. And then on the 4th generation, you will come out with much riches and spoils, which seems like quite the riddle. You'll be a slave, you'll be hated, but hey, 4 generations from now, you'll actually walk out rich people. They're going to just give you their stuff. The same people who beat you up yesterday are going to say, hey, take my collection and my big screen. That's kind of the idea. Now, with that in mind, God, this is a sealed deal for God. This is not a variable. And understand, when God makes you a promise, it's a done deal. It is a done deal. It is, and it doesn't look like it for us. Often the circumstances say this looks like the opposite route to get there. But God knows what he's doing. And in Deuteronomy chapter 11, when God is preparing the nation to cross over into the promised land, he gives some specifics and he says this: when, not if, but when the Lord your God brings you into the land to possess it, you will put blessings on one mountain, a mountain called Mount Gerizim, and you'll put curses on another called Ebal. Now there is a place, and for what it's worth, it's roughly 8 miles southeast of the Samaria capital are these mountains. And there are 2 mountains. There is the mountain Ebal and the Mount Gerizim. And he says, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have this kind of an interesting time. Half of you, 6 of the tribes, are going to stand on Mount Ebal. And they will say, these are the curses. The other 6 will stand actually on Mount Gerizim and say, these are the blessings for loving God and obeying him. It's that simple. In between them is going to be a valley. And the people will have to make a decision. Which of these hills would you rather stand on? Might we say it this way? Which of these hills would you rather die on? Would you rather die? And the idea of it, the whole fundament of it is whether or not you really love God enough to obey him. That's really that simple. So, with that in mind, and he says, you'll put these blessings on the area of Mount Gerizim and Ebal, beside the terebinth trees of Mamre. There is the idea. He goes, beside the very area where Abraham got this promise in the first place, back in Genesis 12. Fast forward to Deuteronomy 27, we're almost at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. He gives specifics. Remember, the people haven't even gotten into the promised land yet. They're staring, if you will, across the banks at the area of Gilgal. They know that the promised land is on the other side of the Jordan. And he says, this is what I'd really like you guys to do. Everyone turn to Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 through 20.
See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil, and that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways and to keep his commandments, his statutes, and his judgments, that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land which you go to possess. But if your heart turns away so that you do not hear and are drawn away and worship other gods and serve them, I announce to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not prolong your days in the land which you cross over the Jordan to go in and possess. I call heaven and earth witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey his voice, and that you may cling to him. For he is your life and the length of your days, and that you may dwell in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them.
So Moses sets before the people and he says, this is what I want you to do. 6 tribes on this hill, 6 tribes on this hill. They'll say, here are the blessings. By the way, that's basically chapters 27 through 29. It's basically, if you will follow the Lord, God's going to bless you in the valley. He's going to bless you in the house. He's going to bless you in the field. You'll be blessed when you come. You'll be blessed when you go. Now, if you don't, and you disobey God, well, then the curses happen. I'm not going to give you that rain. You're going to be basically, everything that you do is going to be empty and futile. And maybe you know what that's like, where you put so much effort in, you get nothing for it. Well, God says that's what happens in disobedience. It isn't God, by the way, just wanting to whop you upside the head. This is God just showing this is what happens with, basically, I'm the one who wants to bless you. I want to give you these things, but I don't want to bless your rebellion. I don't want to bless you running from me. The last thing that God would ever want to do is give you a false sense of security, and he would never want you happy without him. So with that, he says, here's the deal. You're going to stand on this one, you'll do that, you'll on this one. And now, I already know you guys are going to run off, but I also want you to know that if you would return to me, I would bless you. And so understand there's a valley in between these 2 hills where you're going to make that decision. Which hill do you want to go to? Are you all with me on that? And Moses concludes that area by going, look, I've set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. Now, might I beg you, choose life. For those who say no one has a choice, Moses would disagree with you. He's like, look, I've laid the 2 before you. Do you want to live a life of misery, of regret, or do you want to live a life of great blessing? He goes, the difference is your choice. You want to follow the Lord or not? Well, that valley in between those two is the area of Shechem. Now that Shechem, for what it's worth, again I remind you, is the area where you could sit there and you could look and you see on one side the blessings of Mount Gerizim, the curses of Mount Ebal. And that will be really important when this girl starts to speak, because when the Samaritans were not allowed into Jerusalem, they had to pick another hill to sacrifice on. So what hill would you pick? Would you pick Gerizim or would you pick Ebal? Why not? Why? Why would you pick that one? Yeah, that's where all the blessings are. Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, they do. To this day, the Samaritans sacrifice the lambs of Passover on top of Mount Gerizim. To this day. And that whole area is covered in vineyards. Now, for what it's worth, God does say, I want an altar built, a sacrifice. But he doesn't do it on the top of either of them. But he does it at the foot of Mount Ebal. I think that's interesting. At the foot of the curse, where instead of you rising to meet with God, God descends to meet with you at the curse. And there, right there, hence, is the story of the cross. Now, the two hills, in the middle is a valley, Shechem. Now, what it's worth, that valley, Shechem, becomes Zichar. And on the outskirts of that valley, there's a fork in the road that will take you to Scythopolis or Nablus. You don't want to go to Nablus today. You will definitely get shot at if you're not careful. And there, at the fork in the road on the outskirts of Shechem, is a well. To this day, Be'er Sheva sits right there. It is roughly 10, 11 feet wide. It is 11 stories deep. And there at that well, Jesus sits. With this rich history of this valley, where in between these two places of, and by the way, over and over and over, God will say, like we saw with Moses in in Deuteronomy 30, because you know what I really want? I want you to love me. That's what God's saying. He's going, and when you obey, you know what you're going to do? You're going to love me. That's what I want you. Obey you doing what? God says, would you just love me? Now, the history of the well, for what it's worth, wells have a rich history too, and I won't develop this much, but I will say this much, and then we'll pull into this. When Abraham sends his servant, his oldest, Eliezer, to find a wife for his son, Yitzchak, laughter, what a joke, Isaac, that's what his name means. He goes and he finds her at a well. Fast forward down another generation, when Jacob finds the girl that he is to marry, Rachel, and that's overlooking the bait and switch and all the other things that come with that situation, he finds her at a well. When Moses finds his wife to be, he'll find her at a well. It was the Middle Eastern Tinder of the day. It is where the single girl goes. You don't send a married girl unless you have to get water. You send the single girls. And that's the one place they would all coalesce. Now, put all of that together for a moment. It is the place between these two mountains of blessing and cursing. It is the place of decision. There is the well there, and Jesus now encounters this woman. At the place, by the way, where relationships are formed that normally lead to marriage. Are you all with me on that? Now put that into the context of what we're reading. Why do I keep saying that? John, we read in verse 5, so he came to a city in Samaria which is called Sychar, which is just the evolution of Shechem, near a plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son. And it says then, now, verse 6, Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. Can anyone tell me what time the 6th hour is again?
Noon.
Noon. Nice. And do you remember? Okay, now I would really be amazed. There were 3 hours of prayer, the 3rd, the 6th, and the 9th hour. Does anyone remember what the middle one was, what you were basically asking God? Do you remember what the 3 basic themes were? There was God give, God speak, God save. Excellent. So which one was this? Excellent. Well done. Well done. God speak. Yeah. Now, while the Jews, and I'd like you to consider, at this very moment, in Jerusalem, at this moment, able-bodied Jewish men are gathering together to pray. the mincha. And as they're praying the mincha, they're going, God, speak right now. Meanwhile, God in the flesh is sitting at a well. And there is a woman who comes. And it says in verse 7, a woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink. And I remind you again, Hebrew, a question and a statement are only different by inflection. There are several languages that are like that. Give me a drink. Give me a drink. We know that she understands it as a question because she'll say it in verse 9. Verse 8, it says, for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. I'd like you to think about how humorous this is. Because every able-bodied Jewish man would avoid Samaria. A good Jew wouldn't go to Samaria. It'd be a questionable place. And so Jesus, not only they're following their leader, they're following Jesus as the leader, as their master. And as he walks, he goes, now, can you imagine how uncomfortable you would be, first of all? And as you're uncomfortable, Jesus turns to all of them and he goes, now I want you all to go to the store in this community. Which of you feels comfortable? You already want to avoid this area. This is an area you've spent on. And by the way, let me just warn you, when you follow Jesus, he is going to lead you into areas you would never thought you would go into. Not to trip you out, not to make you fall, but rather to have you confront prejudices and issues so that you could love people that you normally would fear, despise, reject, judge ahead of time. Now look it, please understand. I'm not talking about a group who've openly declared some sin as their namesake and identity and going, well, you're judging ahead of time. No, I'm judging the sin, but it's the same judgment I would use on me. Jesus promised me that. But when we're talking about a person because of their race, because of their social strata, because of their education, because of the location of their birth, that they must be, whatever the case would be, I wouldn't go near them. Jesus goes, oh, yes, you are. Oh, yes, you are. And now Jesus has sent them all away. Now put yourself in the shoes of this woman. No reasonable woman would go to the well at noon. Why wouldn't you go to the well at noon? Yeah, first of all, it's because it's hot. It is the hottest time of the day. It is a very miserable time to go and get water. But why would you go? Give me a couple of reasons. Why do you think this woman could have gone at noon?
She doesn't want to be seen.
Okay, great. Yeah, she doesn't want to have to deal with the other girls at the well. Could have just been a late night last night. We don't know. What we do know, she shows up at a very unlikely time. Now, I recognize, and by the way, this really hits me kind of hard as I read this. And the reason is that Jesus needed to have a one-on-one with her, but in order to do that, he needed to get all of his students out of the way. And I wonder how many times God wants to get me out of the way because I would interfere with what he really wants to do in a situation. And he's like, he sends me on an errand to get me out of the situation so that he could do what he really wants to do. Now, if you were this girl, and we're going to find out if she comes with a checkered past and a very fractured heart, she comes to this situation, meeting one Jew is rough. Meeting a group of Jews, that would be a really different situation. And please understand, Jesus is huge on the one-on-ones. That is a big deal to him. And you'll find, how many times you see Jesus do something spectacular to someone and then tell him not to run around and tell everyone? Right? It's like, it's like the guy had no legs. I mean, this is made up compared. And all of a sudden he's got legs and people are like, hey, I notice you're not bouncing anymore. You're kind of walking. And he's like, I can't really tell you. And what we'll find is when Jesus does that, and there are lots of ways people try to explain it. Jesus is using reverse psychology. It gets really weird. Like Jesus telling you something because he knows you'll disobey and do it right. But what we do read in the Gospel of Mark is that when Jesus actually heals a man, he says, no, don't go running on telling everyone. And it says the man actually did go and tell everyone. And it says, therefore, Jesus could not walk about freely among the people, but had to run into deserted areas. And they even went and hunted him down there. You see, what Jesus really wants is more one-on-ones. And the crowds can really interfere with that. We know how to launch something really big, by the way. Please know that. And we could do something that would be like, let's just get a bunch of people in a room and it's church now. But it is really not my ambition. What I really want and what really is precious to me is to make sure that I know people's names, to know you, and to serve you guys individually for your needs. And prayerfully that we would all wind up doing that. I think we've all been at least to a church large enough where we could sneak in and sneak out and have no accountability, and we could kind of do the whole thing in a way so that there's really no risk for us. How frightening was it the first time you came in this door? And you thought, what in the world? What did I get myself into? I cannot sneak out of here. The crazy part is you kept coming back. I remember, I know Alan and Grace may be able to testify of this to some guy. I know Suzanne can. I used to take pictures. We had a Saturday night service. We had 3 on Sunday morning. We had 2 Bible college classes in the afternoon. And then we had a Sunday night service. And I would take pictures of every service so I could pray for every face. Because I knew that most of the people I would never meet. And I remember wanting to know more people. But there's only a certain amount of people you can genuinely, honestly serve. And Jesus was always trying to get that one-on-one with people. And sometimes what he really needs to do is send things away. Now, let's put ourselves in a different perspective of this. Let's flip that coin. Sometimes what the Lord has to do in your situation is to blow it up on you. There you are, and he really wants a one-on-one with you, and you're dragging the party around with you. So you know what he'll do? He'll lay you out sometimes. Pastor Tony, are you saying that God would want me sick? I'd say God would want you with him. And nothing is more important to him. And you're like, I don't have time. God's like, oh, I'll make time. And all of a sudden someone breaks up with you. All of a sudden you lose your job. All of a sudden, that great travel you were going to do or whatever winds up blowing out in the last moment. And you're kind of sitting there going, I have all this time. What do I do with it? And God's like, remember when you said you didn't have time? Because what he really wants, Jesus didn't die to send you to heaven. Jesus died to be with you. Heaven's just a product of that. And you realize, Jesus is like, I love you so much, I just want to be with you. And I'm going to invite you home. I'm going to come and take you home, and we're going to spend eternity together. Why not start now? So she's in a situation where she shows up, and imagine her heart sinking as she shows up at this well, assuming that no one's going to be there, is what I would guess out of this situation. She shows up, and it'd be one thing for her to show up and there's a guy at the well. Great, there's a guy at the well, but a Jew at the well? Oh no. The last thing I need is somebody berating me already. My life's been rough enough. Do you know the situation I'm in? Verse 9. The woman of Samaria said to him, because he says, will you give me a drink? And she is shocked. The woman of Samaria said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? He says, Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Now, it doesn't say that the Samaritans wouldn't have any dealings with the Jews, but let's face it, why would you want to go where you're hated? When was the last time you were blown away that God even speaks to you? Do you realize how crazy of a thought that is? That the creator of the universe, who's still holding everything together, would speak personally to you? Do you realize how astounding that is? We could never earn that. I think how phenomenal. This girl, she's just blown away that a Jew would speak to her at all. And so she asks, okay, the one thing that's clear and obvious here is you're a Jew, I'm a Samaritan, and I'm a Samaritan woman nonetheless. Why are you talking to me? And Jesus flips that. Jesus says in verse 10, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. Now, please understand what he's saying. He's going, if you could see things the way I see things, you'd be asking me. You'd be the one asking and I'd be the one giving. How many times do you think the Lord sends us on something that seems like a very simple task, but in the end of it all, it's to reveal something glorious about Him? And we're so caught up in just getting it done, that we don't actually even see what it is He wants to show us. He is just engaging her in a very basic area of need. And we've talked about thirst last week. It is fundamental for an area that is essential for survival. If you knew. And I wonder how many guys up to this point have said something pretty amazing. I am the man you're looking for. And what we're going to find out is at least a few of them have said that, to some degree, in whatever way. So he says, look, if you knew, and notice, by the way, the word gift. Don't miss that. Look at, you need to recognize that a gift is something you could never earn. I love this about Grace. The concept, not just Grace, she's a wonderful person too. And that grace could never be earned, it would not be grace. Grace is never, please hear me, is never reliant on the deservedness of the recipient, but only on the kindness of the giver. And because my God is infinitely kind, He's a God of great grace, of infinite grace. If you knew the gift that God gives and who it is that's speaking to you, you'd be hitting me up for what I'm asking you, but only in an infinitely better way. Her response, she's figuring it out. Verse 11, the woman says to him, Sir. Notice she's gone from Jew to Sir. Now, Sir is a term of respect. And what we're going to find is she's going to continue to grow in her understanding of Jesus, much like we do. The woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Now, don't miss this, because with Nicodemus, when Jesus was speaking to him, it was not an issue of where, but how. Do you remember that? How can a man be born again? I need the process. But for her, the issue is where. And we're going to find that will be even a fundamental in regards to her area of worship. Now, look at these, and by the way, I remind you, living water is not a fundamentally invented Christian term. It just means running water. There's two kinds, stagnant and living, and you definitely want living. She has no idea the depth of what he's saying. So she's like, where in the world are you going to get that? Which tells me that this well that they're digging down deep to get to, 11 stories deep, how long is your rope to get that? Doesn't seem like living water. She'd say, I already have living water. What's the big deal? Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well? Drank for himself, his sons and his livestock. Where do I go to get this? Jesus says, you need to recognize there are two wells we're dealing with here. Verse 13. Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give will never thirst. But the water that I give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. For something to be planted and continue to grow must be alive. Jesus took a term that was used as a metaphor and he uses it literally. This water is living water. Now, please understand what he's saying. He's going, you need to recognize there is a temporary thirst and there is an eternal thirst. That temporary thirst gets met by getting some kind of liquid down that throat of yours. But that eternal thirst, because you are more than a temporary being, it thirsts for something eternal. In everything else that it chases after. And you find so many things fail because you get them and you realize that it's trying to meet that thirst inside and it can't do it because it's temporary. When I was 19, I had everything that the world promised me could make me happy. I was popular enough, I had enough money, I was successful in the endeavors that I was in the middle of, and I was never more miserable than I was at that time. And worse yet, I felt like the craziest of freaks. Because I thought I was the one who must be wrong. Because I'm like, wow, does this make everyone else happy? Because clearly I'm not happy. And I had more money than I could spend. I was recognized at the time. And then I started to look around and realize that the other people who were in my position, or even more so, were more miserable than I was. And I started to realize, man, this is such a lie. It isn't like if you have more money than you can spend and you say, well, if I could just get more money yet, I'll be happy. How could that work? If you have more than you could possibly use anyways, getting more isn't going to make you any happier. And he looks and he goes, look at what you do. Because you come spiritually hungry. You're like, maybe that person can meet that. Maybe that placement can give me that. Maybe I could just live there, go there, be that, get that. Now hear me on this, because Jesus is going to go for the throat of it here in a moment. It's like, there's an inside thirst right now, and you are really frustrated because you are really trying to meet it, and you keep coming up empty-handed. He goes, look it. The problem with the temporary thirst is it'll keep coming back, but you can keep meeting it. But that eternal thirst, it will never get met until it gets met for good. Hear the difference. You could be thirsty, let's be honest. You could be thirsty, you could drink something, and you're like, good, I'm done. I'm good. Now, granted, you'll be thirsty again, but you could satiate the thirst for the moment. But eternally, that part of your spirit, that thirst, will never even be satiated, only distracted until it actually meets it for good. So he says, whoever drinks of this water that I give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain. You will not only get quenched, you will help quench others. You will be used to take other thirsty people. And here's the problem. We get lonely in our hearts, and our hearts are thirsty, and what happens is we come with a straw. So I meet Suzanne, and I have a straw. I'm like, I'm so desperate to have that hole filled. Let me suck on you to get that. Problem is, she comes with the same situation. So she comes and she's like, I have a hole in my heart too, a hole in my being too. And so she comes with a straw. What happens when you have two people sucking on each other? You can't possibly have enough economy in that. And you find that most relationships are entered into in this state of need instead of a state of overflow. Like, man, I need something from you. And you realize it's like the cards that are there are like, I love you because of the way you make me feel. Well, then what happens when you stop making me feel that way? And so in this, Jesus says, look, you are not only going to have that filled, but you're going to so overflow that other thirsty souls will be drawn to you and be able to actually find what they're looking for. Because you'll be the first person that actually goes, I found it. I am no longer dying of this. I'm no longer running around like crazy, desperately just with a straw, just sucking on anything I can get my hands on to say, will this do it? Will this do it? Will this do it? He goes, man, I want that. And notice what she says in verse 15. The woman says to him, sir, give me this water, but for two reasons, that I may not thirst, nor come here to draw. I'm so tired of coming here to this well. If you could see the glances of the other women, if you could see the misery and how constantly I'm reminded of being the outcast. Now notice, Jesus is working as she is discovering who he is bit by bit. He's also lovingly digging deeper and deeper and deeper into the need. And he'll do that with you too. There are times where God will dig and you'll be like, that's enough. This hurts. This is as far as we can go today. And God will say, well, let me ask you one more question. Are you still thirsty? Is there a part of you that goes, man, I need this and I can't get it? She goes, okay, I'll buy. If you can really offer this so that I can actually get this thing quenched inside of me, I'll take it. And notice what he says, verse 16. Jesus said to her, go call your husband and come here. Now that seems like a crazy question or a crazy command or a suggestion, but to be honest, you do realize what he's doing here, right? He's identifying the counterfeit that she keeps coming to so that he can actually quench the thirst. Now the woman, he gives her a chance to come clean, and she does. The woman, sort of. The woman responds. The woman, and by the way, notice by the way the scripture keeps calling her the woman. You do realize that's a term of respect. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. And Jesus said to her, well done. I wonder how many times Jesus gives us a chance to come clean and we don't want to come clean. And then with that, he wants to say well done, but he can't. He's not going to be a liar. Remember when Jesus speaks to Adam and Eve after their fall? He asks Adam, did you eat of the tree which I told you not to? And he says, oh, it was the woman you gave me. If you hadn't given her to me, you realize I wouldn't have done that. He never mans up. Now, what he's saying isn't a lie, but he isn't actually ever just saying, you're right. You told me not to do it and I did. Will you forgive me? There's none of that. So he asks the woman, what about you? She goes, oh, the serpent deceived me and I ate. Also true. But it's not owning up to the problem. Jesus gives her a chance to own up, and she goes, I have no husband. And he goes, you know what? Awesome. Now, what he tells us, notice, you've said well that you have no husband. In fact, you've had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband. In that you spoke truly. Now, put all of this into context. First of all, you have the castaway of a Samaritan. The lower class of the Samaritans is, well, a woman. And I'm not saying that that's right. I'm just telling you that's the social strata. She was not allowed to vote, for instance. That was a classic Samaritan stance. Now, with that, he's standing there. But this is a girl who, by the way, according to this, is living with someone. She's been married 5 times before, and now she's living with someone. Now, think of the temptation. Jesus says, go call your husband and come here. Would you be tempted to run back and go, hey, I need you to work with me on this. Tell this guy you're my husband because he's offering us something that we may never have to go to the well again, and I really, really want that, and I really don't want to have to look at those girls anymore. I'd really like to just stay here in the house. Will you work with me on this? Would it be tempting? I would think so. So for her to say, I have no husband, that's a dangerous statement to make because she's shacked up. Now, please understand, 50 years ago to be shacked up would be a weird thing. Can we agree on that? Now, today it's not that weird. To be honest, in England, more couples are living together and not married than they're married, between the ages of 20 and 45. That's a crazy thought. Now, we're not even talking about people who have no children. Can you think of how many couples we knew that we had met that had never been married, have no intent on being married, but have several children together? In England, especially in London, it was a very common thing. You'd be like, oh yeah, I've had 5 guys, and the guy I'm living with right now, not a big deal. We've got a couple kids. It's not a really big deal. Now, but in this culture, she was anathema to the Jew because she was Samaritan. She was anathema among the Samaritans to some degree because she was lower strata as a woman. But then this situation puts her in a place. Now, if you were to be fair to say, well, what's the possibility that all 5 of them could have died? It's possible, but it's not likely. Do you know that the average Pharisee, according to Josephus, was divorced at least 13 times? No woman had the right to divorce, although Hillel had actually tried to introduce the concept, but he demanded at least that they had to go and make it official, because what the guy would do is he'd wake up, didn't have her makeup on, or she burnt his toast, and he'd be like, you're out of here. And all he had to say was, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. And that was it. And then she would be kicked out, and then what would happen is somewhere around sunset, he got hungry, there was no dinner on the table, and he was like, he didn't find her and be like, I was just kidding. Poor girl. And Allah was like, you got to treat this girl like a human being. You got to either make this official, or you need to deal with it. But that was about as much right as a woman had. Now, I find it interesting that she had 5. The only reason why is that 5 to a Jew is a very important number because it is the number of the books of the Torah or the Pentateuch. By the way, we'll find that again in John chapter 5, a very fitting chapter for 5s, where you find a man is actually lame at a pool where there are 5 porticos. As if God didn't have to tell us that there were 5 different porches they could lay on. God wants to make clear there are 5 porches here for a reason. And here, if you will, this woman, now, if you would have lost 5 husbands, think about how horrible your situation would be, how hard your heart would be, how rough. But for her to be living with a guy in a place where every person in that community would now she has to not care about what anyone thinks. Her own family would have to disown her to actually be able to work in that community. That's how rough it would be. Now, please, I know that there are things that happen in our past and so forth that we deal with that for some people, it's like you wear the scarlet letter for the rest of your life. Then this chapter's for you. What Jesus is doing here is he's not trying to embarrass her. But what's clear is even after all of these husbands have come and gone, 5 of them come and gone. We don't know how old she is. We don't read how tall, how cute, how marketable, or whatever she is. But what's clear is some guy is still banking on this situation. He has taken a woman with a broken heart who has been abused by the life that she's lived and the life that surrounded her. And she is now in a situation where this guy is willing to still shack up with her. So this guy doesn't care about what anyone else thinks because he's getting what he's looking for. And she has given up. She is no longer in a situation now where she thinks anyone can honestly love her. And she would rather be with the wrong guy for the wrong reasons than be alone. You ever been there? Then you know how thirsty this girl is. She is so thirsty, she is desperate. She is so desperate that she is willing to give up all of her dignity, if there be any left, to be hated by the society around her. What if Jesus was just a Samaritan man who came and spoke to her? It would still be a shock to her. But you take the guy that's in essence, and Jesus, the way that the clothing he would wear, people clearly identified him as a rabbi. In other words, he wasn't just a Jew. He was an outspoken Jewish leader among the people. And he is sitting at a well, and this woman shows up. Oy vey, what in the world? And he turns and goes, "Can I have a drink, please?" She's like, whoa, 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 whoa. The last thing I thought is that you would be saying anything to me. Anything at all. I would have expected you to throw a rock at me. And that's without knowing her situation. And what Jesus shows her is that I am not only willing to engage you and to speak with you, but I know all of this. I know every effort you've put into this thing. And I'll be honest, my understanding of the culture would say that it wouldn't matter how much she would have done or tried or whatever. If the guy's made up her mind, she had no recourse. It wasn't like she could go to anyone and nullify. And by the way, why would you want to nullify if the guy's like so determined to bail on you by this point anyways? I mean, what's it like when you hear how easy it is to sit and hear the enemy at a moment like this? You're not enough. You'll never be enough. No one will ever want you. If they knew who you really were. And you know, to be honest, I think we've all been there to some degree, but not like this one. Because 5 different men, in one way or another, unless they've died, have looked and went, "I'm just done with you. I'm just done." And there'd be nothing she could do to change that. And of all the people Jesus goes and makes a house call to, or if you will here, a well call to, this one, can you see why he had to set all of his disciples away? Because you know the one thing she's not had is a real, honest, pure intimacy. And the first person that's doing that, by the way, who makes the move? Jesus does. He always will. Because to be honest, if you feel like this, you never would you? I could see her sneaking over there trying to get that water as quietly as she can and getting out of there as quickly as she can without ever engaging this guy. And I wonder if she shuddered when he began to speak to her. Could I have a drink, please? Why are you talking to me? It's like, well, if you actually knew who it was that was talking to you, I'd be the one giving, you'd be the one receiving. And you could see her going, wait a minute. Because what he seems to be offering her is something very kind, which would be completely out of character for both cultures. Now look at, I would love to go farther, but I'm not going to, because I really believe the Lord's hitting a nerve with us here for a moment. And it's really this. God wants to meet that in you. He wants to meet that place that we're frightened to death to look at, honestly. Because we've been hurt. We've tried and failed. And the enemy has built a house there that says, you failed. You're not enough. You're not wantable. You're not. Who's going to want you? And we've dealt with human beings enough that they could bring up evidence. And we will be convinced that what he's saying is right. We'll be convinced. Oh. You might as well just give up. Live that life debauchery. Just find anyone who's willing to take anything from you, because at least they want something. Something? Is that what you really want? It's kind of like you're just laying there while the ravens pick at your flesh. You see, what Jesus is doing is so much more than just talking to her about water. He's given her the one thing she has not had in so long, and that's dignity. And he looks at her not as a Samaritan, not even as a woman here, to be honest, but as a thirsty soul that desperately needs the well. So let's look at, what's the one thing if God were to say, go get that and bring it to me? That you would go, anything but that. Go get your past, bring it to me. Go get that thing you keep locked in the closet in your heart. That failure, that thing that when you look at you hate you because of it. Bring that to me. Why? Why would you want that? He goes, because if I can get that off of your hands, then they'll be free to take what I want to hand you. I want to turn you into a well. I want to turn you into a fountain that's a blesser. And do not let the enemy convince you that somehow you could possibly never be used because of what's happened in your life. Let him meet you there at the well. A place, by the way, where a woman's supposed to meet true love. And this woman has had a lot of failed attempts. She's finally met him. And she's shocked that he'd be even interested. God has clothed himself in flesh to meet this girl at a well because nobody else would, at least with any decent care. So let me ask, as we go to prayer, if God were to deal with the permanent need by first dealing with the shame, fleshing out the chump provider, the tawdry replacement, the counterfeit, what is your go-to? What is your go-to that has just never really worked? He goes, will you just, can we deal with that? Can you come clean with me? She's like, I don't have a husband. He's like, yeah. And I wonder if at that moment she finally was really willing to come clean. You ever wonder if she just thought, well, maybe someday this guy will marry me? Yeah, this guy's his husband in training. He's a hit. You know, maybe. And she's like, no, I'm going to finally be honest with myself. This guy isn't it. Neither of the last 5. Because I really believe tonight God wants to meet you at that place. And that may not be here because the last thing you probably want to do is be a blubbering mess in this room to let God open that door, and then you just be like, man, I'm so vulnerable and I don't want this. So let it be your pillow tonight, if not. But I want you to know, I'm memorizing your faces right now to pray for every one of you. You never thirst again. And you'd be more than just not thirsty. You'd be the quencher for a whole lot of other people. See, God didn't intend for you to be a container. He intended for you to be a conduit. And imagine what would happen for the next person who's like, man, I could never be loved like that. For you to be able to go, oh, I know how you feel. But he met me. And if he'll meet me, he'll meet you. And walk out of here with the fact that tonight, for whatever things you battled to come to this place, you came here anyways. And you came here, and God, he wanted you here so desperately tonight so you would hear this. That this week he's like, all right, we're going to let go of those things. We're going to come clean and get honest. We're going to let him go. You're going to let me fill that hole. Because as you've probably heard, it's a God-shaped hole and only he's big enough to fill it. So I want to pray for you. And I want to pray for me too. After walking with the Lord since 1984, and I was already an adult. Well, technically, I was old enough to vote. It's still tempting to go back to stupid things, even though you know they don't satisfy. And I know you feel the gravity of this. Please understand, that's not me, that's God telling you, you know he's right. I want to do more than just meet the need. I want to turn you into someone that will draw other people to that need. Filler. Would you pray with me? Lord, there's a lot of things that we can keep running to that are counterfeit, that will never meet the need, and at best they're distractions. But no doubt, none can be more volatile, more felonious to our own beings than the area of the human heart, the area of love. Oh God, but tonight, we are reminded, Jesus, that you didn't just go there. You had to go through Samaria. You're like, I gotta go there. There is a woman who is hurting. She's desperate and she's empty and she is living in a swamp in her own life. You've come to rescue. And be that the man possessed by a legion, or a woman here who's given it up. Any hope. Thank you for being the dignity restorer. Thank you for being the pursuer. Thank you for being the one who doesn't turn a blind eye to these things, but rather opposite. For being the one who knows everything implicitly and yet still pursues. Thank you for being the one who in great grace gives, the giver. And I thank you that tonight, Lord, we'll never have to earn that, nor ever. And we know who it is we're speaking with to some degree. Enough to know that you are the great gift giver. So Lord, meet us at that place, that empty place, that place of great frustration and disappointment and anger and anxiety and self-loathing and failure and defeat. And Rip out of us, God, the counterfeit. Free our hands. Free our heart, our mind, our beings, Lord, to let you reside where you properly deserve to reside. Jesus, thank you for dying on the cross, that all of our pains and betrayals and Lord, whether that's what we've done to others or what's been done to us, Lord, you took them all upon yourself. Every sin, every crime of the heart, and you paid for them all on the cross. Thank you for that. Thank you for dying for our sins there. Thank you for raising from the grave, just as Scripture promised, that you could offer us a new life where those things that once shackled us could be ripped from us for good. We no longer have to carry the burden of these things ever again. We're not damaged, used, fractured beings anymore. In that sense, you want to heal those things and set the captive free. So Lord, make us more than people who have been quenched of our thirst, but make us fountains that others could be drawn to you and encounter you even as we have. So we gladly let go, God, whatever that is. And for some, if that means you have to exhume and dig deep and dig this stuff up and to get rid of it, Lord, we just say, get rid of it, please. That our hands would be free to be raised in worship and in surrender. And our hearts would be recircumcised to be soft and tender to your voice, to your call, to your love. So Jesus, please, meet us even as you have heard. In Jesus, in your name we pray. Amen.